do this. Reconstruction, chapter 19 is what we are going to be reading. The essential question that you want to think about is, to what extent did Reconstruction achieve its goals? As you look at the picture, this photo is the ruins of the southern plantation, and it stands as a bleak reminder of the changes brought to the South by the Civil War. In this model, you will learn about the challenges that faced the nation after the Civil War and the attempts to meet those challenges. What you will learn is rebuilding the South. The big idea: the nation faced many problems in rebuilding the Union. Lesson 2. The fight over Reconstruction. The big idea: the return to power of the pre-war Southern leadership led Republicans in Congress to take control of Reconstruction. Then you will also learn of Reconstruction in the South. As Reconstruction ended, African Americans faced new hurdles and the South attempted to rebuild. The United States. 1965, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated in 1865. In 1865, around the world, the Jamaicans rebel against the wealthy planter class. Also in 1868, President Andrew Johnson is impeached and almost removed from office. And you can see a U.S. impeachment president admit the Bureau March 13th, 1868. So they were selling tickets to see the impeachment, I guess. I don't know. And around the world, the Meiji dynasty returns to power in Japan. In 1869, the Suez Canal opens, linking the Mediterranean and the Red Seas. In 1870, Hiram Revels becomes the first African American to serve in the U.S. Senate. In 1871, Otto von Bismarck and Wilhelm I unite Germany. And finally, the Compromise of 1877 ends Reconstruction. So that is the timeline for the Civil War. Now we are for the Reconstruction after the Civil War. So as we read this part of the chapter, I want you to listen and ask yourself the following questions. Ask yourself, what does Reconstruction mean? What was President Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction? What is the 13th Amendment? In your opinion, what was the most important accomplishment of the Freedom Bureau? You will have to explain. Why was President Lincoln killed? What was the purpose of it? Why did some Americans oppose President Johnson's Reconstruction plan? Think of those as we read. Rebuilding the South. If you were there, you are a young soldier who has been fighting in the Civil War for many months. Now that the war is over, you are on your way home. During your journey, you pass plantation manor homes, houses, and barns that have been burned down. No one is doing spring planting in the fields. As you near your family's farm, you see the fences and sheds have been destroyed, You wonder what is left of your home and your family. What would you think your future on the farm would be like? Reconstruction begins. After the Civil War ended in 1865, the U.S. government faced the problem of dealing with the defeated southern states. The challenges of Reconstruction, the process of readmitting the former Confederate states to the Union, lasted from 1865 to 1877. The damaged South. Tired Southern soldiers returned home to find that the world they had known before the war was gone. Cities, towns, and farms had been ruined because of high food prices and widespread crop failures. Many Southerners faced starvation. The Confederate money most Southerners held was now worthless. Banks failed and merchants had gone bankrupt because people could not pay their debts. Former Confederate General Braxton Bragg was one of many Southerners who faced economic hardship. He found that all was lost except my debts. In South Carolina, Mary Boykin Chester wrote in her diary about the isolation she experienced after the war. We are shut in, all railroads destroyed, bridges gone, we are cut off from the world. Lincoln's plan. President Abraham Lincoln wanted to reunite the nation as quickly as painlessly as possible. He had proposed a plan for readmitting the southern states. Even before the war ended, called the 10% Plan. It offered Southerners amnesty, or what is called an official pardon, for all illegal acts supporting the rebellion. To receive amnesty, Southerners had to do two things. They had to swear an oath of loyalty to the United States. They also had to agree that slavery was illegal. Once 10% of the voters in a state made these pledges, they could form a new government. The state then could be readmitted to the Union. Louisiana quickly elected a new state legislature under the 10% Plan. Other southern states that had been occupied by Union troops soon followed Louisiana back into the United States. Wade-Davis bill. Some politicians argued that Congress, not the president, should control the southern states. Return to the Union. They believed that Congress had the power to admit new states. Also, many Republican members of Congress thought the 10% Plan did not go far enough. A senator from Michigan expressed their views. The people of the North are not such fools as to turn around and say to the traitors, all you have to do to return is take an oath that henceforth you will be true to the government. Senator Jacob Howard quoted in Reconstruction American Unfinished Revolution 1868 to 1877 by Eric Foner. Two Republicans, Senator Benjamin Wade and Representative Henry Davis, had an alternative to Lincoln's plan. Following procedures of a Wade-Davis bill, a state had to meet two conditions before it could rejoin the Union. First, it had to ban slavery, and second, a majority of adult males in the state had to take the loyalty oath. Under the Wade-Davis bill, only Southerners who swore that they had never supported the Confederacy could vote or uphold office. In general, the bill was much stricter than the 10% plan. Its provisions would make it harder for Southern states to rejoin the Union quickly. President Lincoln therefore refused to sign the bill into law. He thought that few Southern states would agree to meet its requirements. He believed that his plan would help restore an order more quickly. Freedom for African Americans. One thing Republicans agreed on was abolishing slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation had freed slaves only in areas that had not been occupied by Union forces, not in the border states. Many people feared that the federal courts might someday declare the proclamation unconstitutional. Slavery ends on January 31st, 1865. At President Lincoln's urging, Congress proposed the 13th Amendment. This amendment made slavery illegal throughout the United States. The amendment was ratified and took effect on December 18, 1865, when abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison heard the news. He declared that his work was now finished. He called for the American Anti-Slavery Society to break up. Not all abolitionists agreed that their work was done. However, Frederick Douglass insisted that slavery is not abolished until the black man has the ballot vote. Freedom brought important changes to newly freed slaves. Many couples held ceremonies to legitimize marriages that had not been recognized under slavery. Many freed people searched for relatives who had been sold away from their families years earlier. Others placed newspaper ads seeking information about their children. Many women began to work at home instead of in the fields. Still others adopted children of dead relatives to keep families together. Church members established voluntary associations and mutual aid societies to help those in need. Now that they could travel without a pass, many freed people moved from mostly white counties to places with more African Americans. Other freed people traveled simply to test their new freedom of movement. Northern migration, while not as extensive as the coming World War I, Great Migration, beginning in 1910, significantly increased the urban black population of the North. Detroit's African American population, for instance, more than doubled during the 1860s, with the vast majority of its new arrivals coming from the South. A South Carolina woman explained this need. "I must go. If I stay here, I'll never know I'm free." Here's a picture. In this picture, these freed people have packed their household belongings and are leaving Richmond. Many people traveled in search of relatives. Others placed newspaper advertisements looking for long-lost relatives. Here we have, for this particular couple, freedom brought the right to marry. So this couple got married after the war because they couldn't beforehand. For most former slaves, freedom to travel was just the first step on a long road toward equal rights and new ways of life. Adults took new last names and began to insist on being called Mr. or Mrs. as a sign of respect, rather than by their first names or by nicknames. Freed people began to demand the same economic and political rights as white citizens. Henry Adams, a former slave, argued that if I cannot do like a white man, I am not free. 40 acres to farm. Many former slaves wanted their own land to farm. Near the end of the Civil War, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman had issued an order to break up plantations in coastal South Carolina and Georgia. He wanted to divide the land into 40-acre plots and give them to former slaves as compensation for their forced labor before the war. Many white planters refused to surrender their land. Some freed people pointed out that it was only fair that they receive some of the land because their labor had made the plantations prosper. In the end, the U.S. government returned the land to its original owners. At this time, many freed people were unsure about where they would live, what kind of work they would do, and what rights they had. Freedoms that were theirs by law were difficult to enforce. Freedmen's Bureau. In 1865, Congress established the Freedmen's Bureau, an agency providing relief for freed people and certain poor people in the South. The Bureau had a difficult job. At its high point, about 900 agents served the entire South. Bureau Commissioner Oliver O. Howard eventually decided to use the Bureau's limited budget to distribute food to the poor and to provide education and legal help for freed people. The Bureau also helped African American war veterans. The Freedmen's Bureau played an important role in establishing more schools in the South. Laws against educating slaves meant that most freed people had never learned to read or write. Before the war ended, however, Northern groups such as the American Missionary Association began providing books and teachers to African Americans. The teachers were mostly women who were committed to helping freed people. One teacher said of her students, "I never before saw children so eager to learn. It is wonderful how they can have so great a desire for knowledge and such a capacity for attaining it." After the war, some freed people organized their own education efforts. For example, Freedmen's Bureau agents found that some African Americans had opened schools in abandoned buildings. Many white Southerners continued to believe that African Americans should not be educated, despite opposition. By 1869, more than 150,000 African American students were attending more than 3,000 schools. The Freedmen's Bureau also helped establish a number of universities for African Americans, including Howard and Fisk universities. Students quickly filled the new classrooms. Working adults attended classes in the evening. African Americans hoped that education would help them to understand and protect their rights and to enable them to find better jobs. Both black and white Southerners benefited from the effort to provide greater access to education in the South. President Johnson's Reconstruction Plan. While the Freedmen's Bureau was helping African Americans, the issue of how the South would politically rejoin the Union remained unresolved. Soon, however, a tragic event ended Lincoln's dream of peacefully reuniting the country. So, before we begin that next topic, let's look at this picture. This is a picture of an African American students and teachers outside the Freedmen's Bureau School in Beaufort in South Carolina, helping the freedom people. Congress created the Freedmen's Bureau to help freed people and poor Southerners recover from the Civil War. The Bureau assisted people by providing supplies and medical services, establishing schools, supervising contracts between freed people and employees, taking care of lands abandoned or captured during the war. What role did the Freedmen's Bureau play during Reconstruction? So let's keep reading. A new president. On the evening of April 14, 1865, President Lincoln and his wife attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. During the play, John Wilkes Booth, a Southerner who opposed Lincoln's policies, sneaked into the president's theater box and shot him. Lincoln was rushed to a boarding house across the street, where he died early the next morning. Lincoln, his leadership remembered for its honesty, deep intelligence, and high morals, became a symbol for the nation of the struggle of the Civil War. Vice President Andrew Johnson was sworn into office quickly. Reconstruction had now become his responsibility. He would have to win the trust of the nation. Shocked at its leader's death, Johnson's plan for bringing Southern states back into the Union was similar to Lincoln's plan. However, he decided that wealthy Southerners and former Confederate officials would need a presidential pardon to receive amnesty. Johnson shocked radical Republicans by eventually pardoning more than 7,000 people by 1866. New state governments. Johnson was a Democrat whom Republicans had put on the ticket in 1864 to appeal to the border states. A former slaveholder, he was a stubborn man who would soon face a hostile Congress. Johnson offered a mild program for setting up new Southern state governments. First, he appointed a temporary governor for each state. Then, he required that the state revise their constitution. Next, voters elected state and federal representatives. The new state government had to declare that secession was illegal. It also had to ratify the 13th Amendment and refuse to pay Confederate debts. By the end of 1865, all the southern states except Texas had created new governments. Johnson approved them all and declared that the United States was restored. Newly elected representatives came to Washington from each reconstructed southern state. However, Republicans complained that many new representatives had been leaders of the Confederacy. Congress, therefore, refused to readmit the southern states into the Union. Clearly, the nation was still divided. The summary and preview. In this lesson, you learned about early plans for Reconstruction. In the next lesson, you will learn that disagreements about Reconstruction became so serious that the president was almost removed from office. Okay. Thank you for listening.